All right, I will. Thank you, Tracy. Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to Opportunity Alliance Nevada, our virtual brown bag series, Pathways to Racial Economic Justice. We have another really wonderful panel joining us today to discuss workforce, small business, and entrepreneurship. And we want to really thank you for joining us as well. A few housekeeping items. All participants will be muted, but please access the chat box function to post any questions you may have, and Tracy and I will be monitoring it. I'm Linda Hashuff. I'm the Executive Director for Opportunity Alliance Nevada, and we are really very happy to be able to host these forums and engage in these very important conversations. Before we get started, I'd like to share some information with you about Opportunity Alliance Nevada, who we are, why we do what we do. We are a statewide organization, and we bring together resources and people from diverse socioeconomic backgrounds to investigate and understand the barriers faced by struggling low to moderate income Nevadans, and most importantly, to provide pathways to self-sufficiency. We accomplish this through training, financial coaching, mentorships, education and advocacy, and through really important partnerships and collaborations. We do collaborate and partner with public and private nonprofit organizations in an effort to build the financial wellness of their employees and the clients they serve. We offer training such as Bridges Out of Poverty, financial coach training, and Getting Ahead in a Just Getting By world. We investigate, educate, and advocate for policies that provide pathways for all Nevadans to build wealth and economic security. And that leads us to our fourth panel in this series, our discussion today. We have discussed in the prior panels, wealth disparities, housing gaps, and the health wealth approaches for an inclusive economy. And today, as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about workforce, small business development, and entrepreneurship. We don't view ourselves as experts on these topics of racial economic disparities, and that is why we have invited national, state, and local experts to lead these very important conversations. And we're very happy to be able to convene this forum and bring these experts to the table. It's our mission to build self-sufficiency and financial stability for all Nevadans, and to stabilize and improve the lives of families and individuals. We bring together the resources and people from the diverse backgrounds to investigate and understand barriers faced by those struggling economically, and to work to build pathways to solutions for self-sufficiency. With the recent national events related to racial injustice, we wanted to provide this forum to discuss pathways to racial economic justice. And I think today it is especially poignant, considering it's the celebration of life for civil rights icon John Lewis. We want you to know that we stand in solidarity with the fight against systemic racial economic disparities and the historic financial oppression of people of color. We are very inspired by so many people in our community who are using their voices and making change. We want you to know we see you and we are with you. So let's talk about it. This is intended to be an open and direct forum for everyone. The focus is on financial and economic factors, and we know that this will be an important conversation. We appreciate you being here today and being part of this discussion as well. Now I'd like to turn it over to Kip Ortenberger, who is the host and moderator of the Nevada Week show on Las Vegas PBS. And he has generously agreed to moderate this series for us, and we're in very good hands. So welcome, Kip.
Thank you, Linda. Really appreciate it. And thank you, as always, to Opportunity Alliance of Nevada for putting on this forum. I sure have learned a lot throughout the first three that we've had in this series, and I know it's going to be the same with this series as well. You know, interconnectivity, I think, is a constant theme through the first three that we've had here. As Linda mentioned, we talked about health gaps initially, then we talked about housing, then we talked about the health and wealth gap. And how all those are so interdependent and how they all are leading back to the primary piece of this, which is wealth. And there's many pathways to economic equality and justice that we've been talking about. The question and what we're going to focus on this show specifically is how can persons of color, communities of color, entrepreneurship, small business growth, larger workforce development, and even much larger statewide and federal level economic diversification, how can those be pathways to close this wealth gap? That is really the core question that we're hoping to answer. I sure is not the one to answer that. Our very experienced and well-versed panel is, and so I want to introduce them. We're going to do a similar process that we did last week, where I'm not going to read their bios. They're going to tell you a little bit about themselves. It's a great way of doing it, and we're going to start with Kathleen Taylor, Program and Marketing Coordinator at Nevada Women's Business Center. Kathleen, welcome. Thank you for being part of the panel, and tell us a little bit about yourself. And Kathleen, I think you're on mute.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to be a part of the panel. And I'm with the Nevada Women Business Center. We are a program of the Small Business Administration. And we basically help people to start businesses, maintain established businesses, whether they are a startup or existing entrepreneurs and small business owners. And we also connect our clients to seek funding with our lending partners for startup or working capital. And I also serve as a commissioner for the Nevada Department of Business and Industry Commission on Minority Affairs. And I also co-host the Commerce First radio show on behalf of the Urban Chamber of Commerce with Marcel, Schaerer, Deputy Director for the Nevada Department of Business and Industry. So it's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. And if I misstep on my hosting and moderating abilities, you step in and take the reins from me, okay? Absolutely. Shaundell Newsome, owner of Sumnu Marketing and the chair of the Urban Chamber of Commerce, Las Vegas. Shaundell, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm the proud founder of Sumnu Marketing. My daughter now is the primary owner as of 3 years ago. And that's an important part of the discussion that we're having right now, creating generational wealth. I have been in business for 14 years, started as Newsome Marketing Enterprises, utilized all the services that you see that Marcel is going to talk about, and really got off to a great start. Been through the recession and now thriving through this economic downturn. I'm also the chairman of the board of directors for the Urban Chamber of Commerce, which is important right now because the Urban Chamber is being very active in helping a lot of these companies come back with a strong rebound. In addition to that, I'm just a small business advocate. I feel that my journey has started with a small business owner. I was mentored by a small business owner when I was 13 years old. I saw all the things that he can do in a community. That's why I'm a real advocate for small businesses. And just so you guys can get a good picture, the listening audience, we just won an award called the All Money is Green Award, which means that Sumnu Marketing spent more money with minority-owned businesses in the region. That means Nevada, California, Nevada, we spent more money with minority firms. That's extremely important. So I'm really excited to have two key things is generational wealth, as well as spending money with minorities and helping those businesses to grow.
Wonderful. Thank you, Shaundell, for being part of the panel. You mentioned Marcel. Let's go to Marcel next. Marcel Schaerer, Deputy Director of Business and Industry at the state of Nevada. Marcel, tell us a little bit about yourself. Marcel, you're on mute too.
Can you hear me okay? Oh, now you can, okay.
Yes.
I am responsible for managing the Las Vegas Director's Office here, and I oversee programs and initiatives to address the needs of the small business sector and also consumers, including, of course, advocacy, resources, access to capital, advocacy for minorities, and consumer protection. Something about me is that perhaps for this conversation, because of intersectionality, I hold membership in multiple minority groups in terms of race and ethnicity, nationality. I am originally from Paraguay, but I have been in this wonderful state since 1978. So I am a very proud U.S. citizen and also citizen, global citizen of Nevada. In 1976, my wife and I founded International Professional Development Services, a workforce consulting and training company. And I'm glad that I stand in front of all of you saying that we have survived the Great Recession, and now we're going through the COVID-19 recession, and we hope to survive that too. Again, my pleasure to be part of this panel and having this robust conversation about workforce development, small business, micro businesses, and entrepreneurship.
Wonderful, Marcel. Thank you very much. And last but definitely not least, Ken Evans, President of the Urban Chamber of Commerce, Las Vegas. Ken, tell us a little bit about your experience.
Thank you very much, Kip. Pleased to be here today. I want to also say thank you to Linda, Tracy, and Nancy Brown with Opportunity Alliance Nevada. Glad to be part of this series. Ultimately, the reason why we want to participate at the Urban Chamber is we want to help spend some time on historically the challenges, but ultimately focus on solutions and a course of action from there. I've been at the Urban Chamber for nearly 7 years now. Prior to that point, I made the small business journey myself. Although I had some resources as a retired Air Force individual and working in the federal government and the private sector, it still was an adjustment to go into business for myself in 2001. Specifically, I have a background as an engineer, some finance, so I was doing real estate development as a consultant. Started out decently, and then the recession hit in 2008, threw me for a loop. And actually, I started my business in 2001, also with a reserve career going on. So that was a challenge unto itself. But the reason why I share this is because I've been through the struggles and the challenges, and I think that helped give me a good perspective prior to me going to the Urban Chamber. Very quickly, two key components of the Urban Chamber is that on the one hand, we have a physical building. We're one of the few chambers in the country that has our own building. It's a business incubator. We provide commercial space and other amenities for new and emerging companies. At the same time, our crown jewel is the Business Resource Center that we have to make up the Business Success Center. And that includes resource partners like the Women's Business Development Center, SCORE, Nevada Small Business Development Center. So again, a lot of resources to help people regardless of where they are in the small business journey. So I would just conclude by saying at this point that our motto at the Urban Chamber is we want to build businesses to build our community, and that's our way of helping with the subject that we'll be delving into today.
Wonderful, and a great segue, Ken. And I think my first question is to you because of that is let's talk specifically about small business and entrepreneurship here. Why is this such a big part of the conversation when we're talking about closing some of these wealth gaps? Can you give us some reference and context of how small business growth, specifically minority-owned small business growth and entrepreneurship, can do so much to close this gap?
Absolutely. Here at the Urban Chamber, we tell people that small businesses can do three things. Number one, they provide employment. They are the actual job creators. If you look at the statistics for the state of Nevada, the lion's share in many cases of new jobs come from small businesses, if not micro businesses. And the definition I'm going to use for purposes of today's discussion is it could be 10, maybe 20 or less people within the firm, or it could be a micro business that only has 1 to 3 individuals. So again, they create jobs. Number two, they put resources back into the community. And what I mean by that is they may be sponsoring athletic teams. They, school's right around the corner, so they may contribute backpacks and other materials to support civic engagements like that. And then number three, they participate in political engagement. A very big part of what we do is advocacy on behalf of our small businesses. Well, some of the fuel from that comes from our small businesses and the resources that they give us to get involved in the political process. So again, I know there's a lot of socioeconomic challenges out there, but I can tell you, thank you to Damon Hodge and Shaundell Newsome. Prior to me getting started at the Urban Chamber, we drafted a letter, and what we said is, yes, there's socioeconomic challenges, but we're going to focus on the economic side of that for the reasons that I suggested. Again, small businesses can create jobs, put resources into the community, and last but not least, get involved in political engagement. So that's the reason why it's so important to build businesses that build our community.
Shaundell, I'm going to kick it over to you and ask also to add on to that also, of course, we've talked about this on Nevada Week before. You and I have talked about this personally, the opportunities for personal and family wealth. Of course, you have a lot of experience in that as well with small business growth and entrepreneurship. You give us some context there, please.
Well, I'll tell you, it's a mindset, right? And really what happens is, my father grew up in the projects in Brooklyn. So he struggled with understanding wealth creation and things like that, because, when you grow up in an environment where everybody is, the same, looking at surviving, I'll say that, is that in neighborhoods like Bed-Stuy, people are surviving. So the socioeconomic challenges that Ken is talking about is everybody's at the same plateau. So when you look at what happened is, when my father started to move into home ownership, his family was saying he's trying to be white. And so now they're ostracizing, they're moving my father away from trying to be successful, and they're kind of taunting him and teasing him because he's trying to make economic strides for his family. So that was extremely difficult. That was extremely difficult for my dad, because everybody thought, thought that he was trying to be better than everybody else. When in essence, he's trying to do better, be a better provider for his family. So I wanted to put it in that kind of context. Now, next generation, he's telling us, me and my brothers and sisters, that he does not want that to carry on to the next generation. So he broke the cycle. He broke the chains of poverty mindset to prosperity. And he went from welfare to wealth. And that's when it started, when my father bought a brownstone in Brooklyn. That tiny action changed the mindset of how me and my brothers and sisters think. So now when my daughter's growing up and she's seeing a different way, it is really an easier transfer of mindset for her to move into entrepreneurship, because now we're moving out of that mindset and that space of where she's not being teased by her siblings and her cousins. She's being lifted up. She's, people like now saying, wow, that's pretty cool, because now we feel like we belong there. So that's a big deal. It's all mindset more than anything else. I think people equate it a lot with money, but the money comes with the mindset, not the other way around. So I hope one of my best friends said this one time, is that you can give a person $1 million and they still keep the same mindset. They'll be stuck without the wealth and still have that wealth gap, because they instead of them moving out of the neighborhood, they will do what we call ghetto fabulous. They'll buy anything that they don't need, and they'll still be stuck in the same neighborhood. So that hopefully that answers your question there, Kit.
It does, and it very much relates to our previous forum last week, where we were talking about the health and wealth gap, and Mina, one of our panelists, brought exactly this up and talked about the mindset change and how important that is to this discussion. Marcel, I want to go to you too, and maybe we can talk on a more macro level here, again, about small business and entrepreneurship. We'll get into the workforce development side, unless you want to address that as well, but can you give us an idea, just growth of small business, especially minority-owned businesses here within our state, and a much larger, robust entrepreneurial side of things too. What could this mean for our economy? Can you put it in some type of numbers or some context for us?
Well, we have to realize that if you go back to, 2000 in Nevada, there were roughly about 142,000 small businesses. Then in 2010, basically goes up by 75,000. And of course, prior to COVID, we are probably in the range of 275,000 to 300,000 small businesses in Nevada. That speaks volume about what is taking place in the area of entrepreneurship. And I think it is important to realize that an important contributor to economic inequality in this country is the large and persistent racial and ethnic disparity found in business ownership and performance. Well, many of us, including me, what is it that we try to do is, of course, if we want to get closer to this wealth, the idea of wealth accumulation, of course, a small business and entrepreneurship is a powerful tool to get closer to that. And many of us have done that, getting closer and closer. So we are surrounded by statistics pointing to, of course, how important entrepreneurship is. And the disparities that exist there, and some of the findings that continue to be in place. After all, and during a presentation today, Shaundell was making reference that SBA is celebrating 67 years of existence today on July 30th. And he was just mentioning that, and I kept thinking about a report that was produced by the SBA Office of Advocacy in January 2018. Half of Black families have less than $9,200 in wealth, and half of the Latino families have less than $12,000 in wealth. So it's still, entrepreneurship is there to move this performance indicator closer to wealth accumulation. But again, the numbers are terrific prior to COVID-19. And we'll have to see what the story tells us, especially now that we are going through a COVID-19 recession.
And I'm speaking prior to COVID-19, of course, but can you give us some idea, disproportionality, are we anywhere representative of our race and ethnic populations here within our state when we're looking at small businesses? And maybe you can give us some idea of, minority-owned businesses, are they small, medium-sized, or larger-size small businesses?
Well, I think it's what is considered small. And according, again, to a 2020 small business profile by the SBA, there are 52,000 self-employed minorities. The numbers are huge again. But again, the definitions of what a small business are varies from 500 employees to the state definition of a small business is 150 employees or less. But in reality, we know that 99% of the small businesses are in that category of perhaps 150 or less. And many of them are basically 10 employees or less. That is the reality of it. But the strides and what minority businesses have done for the state has been just remarkable. And the data is there. At some point, I wrote an article back last year mentioning again how robust. And again, the economic census will probably show that 93,000 to well over 100 minority firms exist in Nevada. So the numbers are huge, Kip.
Yes, a significant portion of those small businesses, and that's encouraging news, very encouraging news. I want to switch the conversation to workforce development here, Kathleen, and Let's talk about, again, for the context of this conversation, I think we've kind of set the stage on the small business and entrepreneurial side and exactly what we're looking at here. We talk about some of the solutions and barriers. Let's get kind of a baseline on workforce itself. Disproportionality here, when we are looking at workforce, are we talking about availability, wages, diversification of jobs? What are the core things we want to be examining here throughout this conversation? We're talking about workforce development.
Sure. I'd like to share with the audience, if you have an opportunity to get the current edition, the July edition of Nevada Business, the magazine. It's also digital and online, Nevada Business Magazine. It has an excellent article talking about reinventing Nevada's workforce after the shutdown. And I just like to share just a couple paragraphs with you to put this in context of the discussion. So the disruption in reference to COVID-19 and the shutdown, it created an almost overnight pivot to a more non-traditional landscape of how work is done, and that really brings opportunities for a more diversified workforce and a more diversified workplace. Continuing, that shift in traditional work environments lends itself to a new industry, new opportunities. This new industry helps businesses develop skills necessary to work remotely, including virtual training platforms for customer service, call support, data entry, record processing, virtual estimating for contracts. And those are all areas where employers will either need to hire skilled employees or train their own. So I wanted to share this with you to frame more of the discussion around Nevada workforce development and making that pivot. So it seems to me that this is an opportunity, and the panel that I moderated with Sumnu Marketing and NDOT earlier this morning, we were talking about this COVID-19, the impacts and the public health and economic connection. It really is pushing a small business renaissance where businesses have the opportunity to reevaluate their business model, to restart, to relaunch, to restructure according to this need on a more digital landscape for opportunities and workforce development. And speaking of which, if you are an employer or an employee, take advantage of the here and now in reference to training your staff or upgrading your systems so that they're more digital, aligned with more digital delivery of services and digital engagement or online engagement with perhaps a new customer base that wants to be served in that capacity online. Or as an employee, seek out training programs that are geared towards getting your skill level up to speed to align more so with digital platforms and the need for those services. So those are some trends that I'm seeing in Nevada and also worldwide. And I hope that addresses your question, Kip.
It did, yes, thank you. And so fascinating to think of it in these terms and where we kind of are with COVID. Of course, at a state level, we've been hearing about diversification of our economy. Of course, we're seeing the effects of it again, the recession, obviously, and now with COVID, of what a lack of diversity in our economy can cause. But what you're speaking to is diversity in the skills of the workforce and how that is going to change and evolve. Regardless of what sector you are trying to diversify. I think that's extremely compelling to this conversation. And before we move on, I wanted to open up to the panel, especially we've got, in addition to having experts in small business and entrepreneurs, and we're also a lot of experience in owning your own small businesses. And Ken, maybe we start with you. What Kathleen's talking about here, the demand for these tech skills and how that's going to diversify what an employee is doing potentially from COVID and on. Can you reflect on that and give us maybe some of your perspective?
Yes, I definitely can. In fact, one document that I want to suggest everyone takes a look at, it is the Workforce Blueprint 2.0 document. It was done as a result of a study, a joint study by the Vegas Chamber, the Las Vegas Global Economic Alliance, which is our regional development authority, and then Workforce Connections, which is the Southern Nevada Workforce Development Board structure that we have to address rehabilitation, employment training, as well as workforce development training. But again, that document is called the Workforce Blueprint 2.0. And what it suggested is even prior to COVID-19, we were going to need to move in a direction, as Kathleen suggested, that was more digital and virtual and at a minimum, just technology based and in nature.
Mm-hmm.
I think in some respects, COVID-19 has accelerated that. When I look at a lot of my small businesses that managed to continue to operate, the reason why they were able to do that is because they had either initially made the pivot to virtual operations in some capacity, or they had outright had a more e-commerce or virtual platform-based business. So I think this is a direction that will continue. And what I always suggest to people is embrace change, grow from it, and continue to move forward, because I don't see us going back. And in some cases, I'll give you a quick example. I look at several of our restaurants. They had to close their sit-down operations and move to curbside and to-go operations. Well, in several cases, they identified a revenue stream that may not have been there before, or they boasted a revenue stream that was there, but probably not as prominent. So that's just an example of how, yes, COVID-19 has had an impact, but in some cases, there's a silver lining in that it's pushing us in a different direction in terms of how we operate our small businesses, as well as an employee, the skills we need to bring to the table.
Yes, very, very good points. Shaundell, would you like to add on to that?
You know, I do. I think that Kathleen and Marcel and Ken made some great points. So I want to touch on them. Is one thing that Marcel talked about was the wealth gap. And here's what when Ken talked about building businesses to build our community, while we do a lot of those things, we support baseball teams, dance groups, whatever it is, we get involved in our churches. The other thing that's real important that is a message that we've been trying to send, especially to African-American owned businesses, is we are not employers. And nobody wanted to even, kind of broach that subject. But in order for us to close the wealth gap, we have to become employers. We have to become the change that we really want to see. We can't just keep asking everyone else to hire us. So one of the things that is a glaring statistic is, I think at one point it was like 2.6 Black-owned businesses in this 2.6 million Black-owned businesses country, with less than 4% of them having only ones having employees. So 4% having employees and everybody else being a solopreneur is not really the way to break down those barriers and those wealth gaps. So that while there's a lot of systemic racism that blocks those efforts, there still has to be another push on the other side where our businesses have to build bigger capacity. We have to think about franchising and moving to bigger opportunities. We have to think about how to impact our communities by owning businesses that are bankable, that are bigger than the small mom and pops as well. So there's a lot of work to be done in that arena. So I wanted, the workforce piece is very interesting because typically minorities are on the last end of those numbers when it comes to employment, but also we're on the last end when it comes to job creation. So I just want to make sure that everybody knows who is listening to this that part of the wealth gap is kind of a push both ways. We need policy, but we also need effort, and we need sacrifices that need to be made by our Black-owned businesses in order to close that wealth gap.
And Marcel, I want to kick it back to you on something Shaundell said, and I think this is going to segue into some of the historical barriers we've seen again before COVID, but a bankable business here and what that might mean, especially in maybe this new era. You give us some examples of, if we're looking at what the most bankable businesses are, what sectors they're working in here in the state. Can you give us some examples of those? And Marcel, maybe we start with you on this.
Yeah, I would like to add what Ken was saying, and beyond just being bankable or not bankable businesses, I think we need to look at the new trends. And in addition to the document that Ken was referring to, the Governor's Office of Economic Development provides, some key industries. And I think it is important that regardless of being bankable today, we also have to follow these new trends in terms of information technology and the infrastructure around it, manufacturing and logistics and the infrastructure around it. And that goes beyond the traditional ones. There is also the health trend and aerospace and defense. So there are many opportunities, but we need to go beyond this idea of just being bankable. We need to put a structure around it in which people are given the opportunity to take risk, create opportunities, and go that way. But it has to be a team effort. It has to be a holistic approach, because we are inundated by data and percentages. And one of the things that I would like to mention, and hopefully Tracy can bring it to display it on the screen, is this whole area of entrepreneurship. And I wanted just to share that with you. This is from the Kauffman Foundation, as you can see right there. It says, and this is the data again, less than 81% of entrepreneurs do not have access to bank loans or venture capital. 1% of venture capital dollars went to African Americans, 1% in Latino founders in 1916. And less than 2% of venture capital dollars went to women. We can revisit all this data and percentages, and probably the percentages will change a little bit. But this is the opportunity, I think, under COVID-19, under this COVID-19 recession, to reset the clock and basically make an infrastructure that is bankable for minorities to take higher risk and to really push the envelope into the new Nevada economy, what is coming our way. Even though today it might be very difficult to envision that. But this is where we are. And I think we can revisit data, reflect on that, look disparity studies after disparity studies, and we conclude the same thing. So this is the time to do something much, much more in terms of policy solutions that can propel minorities into a different set of performances.
And since we're talking about finance here, let's broaden that conversation then and talk about solutions here. We have, of course, a lot of loan lending types of programs. We have opportunity funds that are both state-run or nonprofit and community-based run as well. What are we missing? Ken, maybe we start with you on this. We're talking about policy, and let's shoot for the stars here. Let's talk about big federal, state level policy, especially in the era of COVID relief. What can we change? What would be a really big lending policy we might be able to get through?
A couple of things. In fact, I'm going to build on the slide that Marcel just showed. Yes, if you talk to most entrepreneurs or business owners that are just getting started, and you say, what are the 3 things you need to get started? The 3 most important things, they're probably going to say access to capital, access to capital, access to capital, and I'll throw the word access to affordable capital in there, because that points to the topic that, or what you just mentioned, the fact that, yes, it's one thing to go to a bank and get a loan, but if the interest rate is so high that it eats up your cash flow trying to pay that loan, that it's going to make it hard for the business to grow. So first and foremost, if there's a way for states, possibly with both state resources and federal resources, to fund a revolving loan fund that will have favorable conditions for brand new startups and businesses, that would definitely be helpful. And then something else I want to mention that's become more and more prevalent at the Urban Chamber is we want more of our small business owners, especially minority and beyond that African American owned businesses, we want them to get into the equity-based capital as well, meaning learning how to work with either accredited or non-accredited investors that can, whether it's through crowdfunding or cloud funding, those are unique, innovative ways to get capital to some of our smaller startups that can't touch traditional financing that is normally available if you have 2 or 3 years time in business or less. The other point that I want to make right now, Kip, and you touched on it, is that it's time to stop talking and move forward. And what I'm getting at there is, if you look at the Kerner Commission report, and I've been mentioning that every chance I get, the Kerner Commission report, the impetus for that was there were race riots in summer 1967 in Detroit and Newark, New Jersey. As a result, then President Lyndon B. Johnson commissioned an 11-member commission to study 3 things: what happened, why did it happen, and what could be done to prevent future racial disturbances. They came up with a list of recommendations, which included several of the topics that you've already covered, plus plan to cover, as well as today's topic on entrepreneurship and workforce development. The point I would make now is if you go to the Eisenhower Foundation website, what it will essentially say is America keeps going through cycles because we talk about the recommendations, we may even talk about the root causes, but it doesn't lead to concrete action. And so part of the reason why I'm happy we're doing this panel, but above and beyond that, part of the reason why I'm happy to see groups like Operation Alliance Nevada is because I think there's going to be some concrete action so that we can change the ecosystem so that we'll get away from a statistic that says that less than 1% of African American and Latino businesses get capital, or less than 2% of women-owned businesses get access to capital in order to get started. So I'm really hoping we'll move into the stage of action.
Excuse me, Kip, may I make a comment
Yes.
regarding capital and the slide that Marcel placed on the screen?
Please do, yes.
Each section had the word dollar, dollar, dollar. Now let's talk about the dollar in the here and now and where it's going to go. It seems that even though that we have made this shift in how we engage through digital platforms, through technology, how we're doing business are more on a more e-commerce stage or our platforms, we also need to consider how the dollar is going to change with that trajectory as well. There is no coincidence or no fluke of nature that we have a national coin shortage going on. We have to pay close attention, whether you're a business owner or an employee or you're just basically trying to figure it out. Make sure that you pay attention to the where currency is going. We're going from a type of paper currency to a digital dollar. If you want to look at a potential entry point into looking at how you can leverage or enter the marketplace for wealth parity or wealth equality, or putting your family, your legacy, your business on the platform to be that bankable business, look at where the currency is going to go with technology. So I wouldn't be surprised, and I hope that I'm still alive to see this happen. We may very well be part of a webinar hosted by Opportunity Alliance Nevada, talking about from dollar to digital dollar and currency, and how small businesses can upgrade their processes, their systems, in order to process this type of currency that their potential customers may very well need to start paying. So it's quite interesting how things are going along the lines of technology and also currency as well. The way that we are spending money now is going to be very different in reference to what type of currency it's going to be and how processes need to be in place to process that type of digital payment. So it'll be very interesting.
Yeah, boy, I mean, you're blowing our minds with this shift to digital and how much is going to be encompassed here and how much demands are going to be on particularly small businesses to kind of get over that hump. I want to come to the resource side here, Kathleen, too, and let's talk about in our state, if you are a small business and you are trying to look ahead and get over this, ahead of this curve here, and prepare yourself for these types of transitions to digital currency, what resources do we have available that can help small businesses and entrepreneurs do that?
Well, frankly speaking, I think that we need to solidify our relationships with the tech industry. I think those relationships are very underutilized, very under the radar, because Nevada within itself is very unique in that traditionally it's been a service hospitality driven industry where there are people involved for that interaction. Now we're seeing a trend where we're phasing out of that, integrating more automation and AI. And in order to understand that and create a hub of resources, we need to look at our tech industries, our tech partners. So I would say, first of all, before as a resource partner, before I can recommend, I can provide those recommendations, I myself need to educate myself and reach out to establish those relationships with the tech industry in Nevada, so that now I can make an informed decision as to, okay, connect to this company, this organization, this agency, for further resources and development within the tech industry.
Gotcha. Yeah, and absolutely. So before we even get to being able to provide the resources, we need to get the resources ourselves. Really,
Correct.
really great point.
And
we have a question related to lending. I think it's very, very poignant. Todd Clary wrote, "Why are loans looked at as being the de facto method of, quote, access to capital, end quote? Doesn't that put the small business on the hook and that they may not be able to afford when starting out?" Anybody in the panel want to jump ahead? Ken?
Yeah, yes, I'll definitely hop in because it'll give me a chance to expand on when I was talking about equity investment, hopefully being more prevalent. In fact, one thing I want to say too is the reason why I mentioned and stressed being able to get capital from both accredited and non-accredited investors is because you may have a source of capital that you could tap in through via family and friends, or even just associates who believe in what you do. So we have to make sure there are not barriers to doing that through working with business and industry, for example, and the securities department, to ensure that as long as the potential investor is educated, then that means that it's okay for them to put capital into your small business, especially if you're just getting started. And here's the reason why that's so significant. I can tell you from personal experience, I've been an equity investor myself on a small basis. And the good thing is when you work with an equity investor, yes, in some cases they may want a percentage of ownership, but at the same time, there's not a loan hanging over your head if things don't go according to plan, or if there's a rough period of time. The equity investor realizes that that's part of the risk they take, but in exchange for that risk, you're allowed to move forward with your idea. And it takes a little bit of the pressure off because you're not trying to worry about a loan that you have to immediately service. Even if it's an interest-only loan, there's still that pressure of having to cash flow and service that debt that you don't necessarily have if you work with some form of an equity investment. So I really hope as we move forward, that's an avenue that more of us will become educated on, again, with the necessary risk education to potential non-accredited investors, but I still think that's a good pool for us to tap into.
So Kip, if I could chime in on this, because here's the reality, because if we're talking about, again, the disparities in the equity and the wealth gap, the work that Opportunity Alliance of Nevada is doing right now is so important. And this is why it's important, is, again, Ken, and I always tell Ken this, we talk about this all the time, and I know Todd's question is coming from a great place, but in reality, most people that Ken and I deal with on a day-to-day basis don't understand any of that. They don't understand equity base. They don't understand investors. They don't understand. So financial literacy, it starts there. It is not like one day we're going to grab all of these folks and they're going to walk into an investor and they're going to present themselves in a manner where an investor is going to put money into their business. The first thing we have to do is they have to start with the basics, right? So when we're talking about closing that wealth gap and we're talking about the disparities, it has to start with, first, I need to understand my personal finance. I have to understand bank accounts. I have to understand IRAs. I have to understand, because I'm telling you that most people, sometimes we're trying to take people to a leap where they can't leap to. And so I think it's real important, the work that Opportunity Alliance is doing right now, where they're talking about housing and they're talking about banking and they're talking about bridges out of poverty. It's extremely important that we, again, go back to that mindset, because all the stuff Ken said is absolutely correct. But if that person is not prepared to have that conversation, and I'll just use my daughter as an example. Recently, when we went through the COVID-19 and we got shut down, my daughter had to know how to respond to all of the questions that her banker asked her and how the SBA asked her. She had to respond. And then when they had discrepancies, she had to respond again. When they said, well, we need your credit score and it's not right. Oh no, my credit score is right, because I just looked at my credit score last month. You have to have all of that. So in reality, while we would love to have this beautiful picture painted that we can have people have these discussions with investors and bankers and all of that, we have to start at the basic root of financial literacy. And I know when Marcel was at the Business Success Center, we always talked about money smart. We always talked about challenging people to understand finances. So that's where the gap comes in, Kip. And I don't want to damp on our solution part, but the solution is we got to start from the ground and get people in the mindset of where they can have those conversations that Ken's talking about.
No, absolutely. And let's segue and let's talk about the solutions, and let's talk about resources more specifically here, particularly to what exactly you're saying. Marcel, I'll go to you, and Kathleen, I'll go to you right after. Let's identify some of the resources we have, and let's go all the way to the beginning here and talk about basic financial literacy resources an entrepreneur could have. Marcel, I know on the show previously on Nevada Week, we've talked about some of those, the roadmap being one of them. Can you identify some of those resources for us?
Well, thank you. And again, Tracy, if you can bring up just the link. When it comes to resources, I think there is a massive amount of resources everywhere. And you mentioned the roadmap, Kip. The roadmap is basically a sort of this ecosystem when it comes to business development. Let's face it, small business owners and entrepreneurs have the vision, but may not know all the resources out there. And of course, there is something called the roadmap. This group is quite familiar with that, but if you access that information, you will see it is just a visual tool a PDF interactive tool in which there are over 300 links that can put you in contact with resources. So you can tap into individuals who are vested, who have the best intention to provide knowledge and skills, because otherwise we don't know. And I often reflect on this, and probably many of us are familiar with the program. The Discovery Channel has this program, Being Naked and Afraid. I think entrepreneurs and small business owners, when we look at things, how massive this opportunity of a business idea is, we are naked and afraid, and we need to tap into resources. We need a roadmap to look into funding. We need a roadmap to look into certifications and contracts, for example, or how to hire employees. And sometimes what we do is we know some agencies, we know some key individuals, and that is great. But beyond that, we need to capture this more robust, what I call ecosystem, which is economic development, workforce development, and business development, and doing business. How to go about doing businesses. Shaundell mentioned literacy, financial literacy. Well, that's one component, but you also need a business plan, but it's not the traditional business plan anymore. It has to be a COVID-19 business plan moving forward, and basically connecting the dots with what Kathleen was mentioning, this technology. Well, if technology is one area, we need a technology infrastructure. And loans and grants and crowdfunding can come through that. But we really need something totally different. And my vision, Kip, and everyone else, is on October 2019, specifically October 12, 2019, Eliud Kipchoge ran a sub 2-hour marathon, 26.2 miles in less than 2 minutes. My point is that a huge team was behind Kipchoge, this guy from Nigeria, to run and to have the ability to execute. And I think we need a different mindset, going back to what Ken was saying, a mindset of establishing a sub 2-hour marathon. What is specifically the metrics that we need to put in around this technology infrastructure, and really create a huge team behind that with the ability to execute and move beyond what we know, but how to do it, when, and who is going to do it. So hopefully that helps.
It does. Can you give us some examples? I mean, it might be challenging to identify some low-hanging fruit here. I'm sure low-hanging fruit are still very complex to move things forward, but is there one key thing you're talking about in this entire ecosystem that if we were to change, if we were to focus a lot of our energy on and really see a shift, whether that's policy or otherwise, could really improve and I guess lift all boats when we're talking about this collectively?
In terms of, I think in terms of policy solutions, my goodness, again, I think I will look at this using data to drive decision making, and basically enable Main Street business to operate under the new normal. This goes beyond maybe what we are trying to do also in terms of PPE or social distancing, but it's basically a workforce is, and I don't know, I may be difficult to articulate this, but is all this ecosystem coming into play to create this robust approach to doing business differently, because we are into this COVID-19 for a long time in whatever shape or form, and it will require a realignment. And these resources are out there, whatever R you want to use, reconfigure, reinvent, reboot your business, you will have to have a team of individuals, a different mindset of remarkable collaboration around that business idea, whatever that might be. And I will just grab that, what Kathleen was mentioning in terms of the technology, the new technologies in many different industries, including artificial intelligence or the Internet of Things or industrial Internet of Things. Again, to put things in place that are very different with a robust collaboration of resources.
So let me just chime in real quick, Kip, if I could, just because, you know, technology, both of them mentioned technology. So what my daughter has done is she's taken everything that I've done over the last 14 years and she's doing it online. So she's basically saying, you know what, Dad, you did great in the classroom. You can hit 30 people and they get excited, and, you know, but now if you see where the world is moving to, and here's where small businesses have to understand the opportunity. Now that we can do more things online, it expands us out of Nevada. It gets us away from the neighborhood. It gets us away from the circles we're used to dealing in. Now that we can't go to the local chamber events, now we can talk to more people. Now we can engage more people. So what Kathleen was talking about is we have to embrace technology, not only embrace technology, but look at here. Here's my old phone. I don't know if you guys can see that. That's my BlackBerry. And then now today I have my iPhone. So we have to think that when I had the BlackBerry, I thought this was the greatest thing since sliced bread. So now my daughter was telling me, Dad, we got to change everything that we're doing, because I know when I get this business going, everything is going to be online. So virtual meetings is something she talked about 3 to 5 years ago that we have already invested the dollars, already making it happen. So these are things that we have to talk about when we talk about changing post-COVID-19. Is things are not always going back to the way they were.
And I guess if I may, Kip, as far as policy related to resources that would make an immediate impact, one of the things we advocated for at the Urban Chamber, as well as several of our colleagues, for example, at the Asian Chamber, the Latin Chamber, and some of the other chambers that focus on small, diverse businesses, we said, hey, look, if you take a look at the statistics in terms of the Paycheck Protection Program or PPP funds, as well as the Economic Injury Disaster Loan or EIDL funds, where did those funds go the first round? They didn't come to small, diverse businesses. So when we advocated with our congressional delegation, and we said, look, those funds need to be administered in a manner where they come to small, diverse businesses, in particular, in our case, African-American owned businesses that got left behind, if not shut out completely. As a result, they targeted $60 billion in PPP funds, plus they said that they would be administered through community development financial institutions, as opposed to trying to access a bank that you may or may not have relationships with. In many cases, you did not. That had an immediate impact and made sure that a lot more of our small businesses got access to PPP funds. More recently, we've said, since we know there are PPP funds that have not been deployed, we asked one of our senators, can we reprogram those dollars into EIDL funds that could be specifically targeted, once again, to small, diverse businesses, and in some cases, specifically to African-American owned firms. So those are two examples of policies that if we followed them and continued them, that will make an immediate impact in terms of deploying much needed PPP funds and EIDL funds to those that need them most.
To follow up on that, Kevin, really, really quick, if you're a small business owner, an entrepreneur, you have ideas that need to get maybe to Capitol Hill. What are the recommendations here? Is this a contact the Urban League and talk to a Ken type of thing?
Yes, and actually, I'm going to tease you a little bit, Kip, but it happens all the time. The Urban Chamber, we would definitely tell you.
Sorry.
It's all good. Happens all the time, but we would tell you, yes, contact the Urban Chamber very quickly. I'll say info, I-N-F-O at urbanchamber.org, or old school phone number, still works, 702-648-6222. Because yes, part of the reason why we're there, as well as our other resource partners, is to provide that type of advocacy. Making the connection between where the rubber meets the road with both our small businesses as well as our larger businesses that are trying to scale, and the policymakers at the local level, state level, and yes, the federal level.
I'm going to blame my misnaming on Shaundell's BlackBerry that he pulled out there. It threw me completely off. And very reflective, very reflective of a technology gap here that he still has that. Kathleen, I wanted to come to you and talk more specifically about some of the resources here. Back to Marcel's point, talking about this larger ecosystem, and I wanted to come to you and talk more about the individual ecosystem here, and again, how this really ties into Opportunity Alliance of Nevada's resource provision and connecting all of their community partners and their mentorship too. I just named it there: networking, training and education, access to capital, additional guidance are all things that Opportunity Alliance of Nevada is trying to do. What resources do we have in the community that can provide and be a provider of these things?
Okay, well, given the economic and public health climate, Kip, I'm going to focus my response on one word within the mission of the Opportunity Alliance of Nevada. And the mission is building sustainable communities across Nevada to stabilize and improve the lives of individuals and families. And the word I'd like to focus on is stabilize, because we're in a climate where we need stabilization, whether it's within our homes or our business community. So I'd like to focus more so on resources that speaks to a degree at least, the stabilization as it relates to funding and grants that are available to our small business community. So for example, the Clark County has a small business rental assistance grant that is available up to $10,000 to help our small businesses with rent assistance and working with their landlord to pay back rent. Please contact Clark County, go on their website for more information about the application and requirements. Also, Clark County has available the Small Business Protective Retrofit Grant, up to $5,000 to cover expenses that businesses incurred when purchasing PPE materials for the safety of their employees, the modification of their business, and also to keep their customers safe. So again, go to Clark County's website. An additional grant resource is with the City of Las Vegas. The City of Las Vegas is going through the second round of grant available to businesses that are licensed within the City of Las Vegas. And that grant amount is up to $4,000 to $10,000. Also, the City of North Las Vegas as well has a grant fund that's available that's up to $25,000 for businesses with 20 employees or less. And this capital or this grant funds can be could be used for working capital such as rent, facilities, inventory, payroll, licensing fees, so on and so forth. And lastly, for the nonprofit organizations that are out there, if you're a nonprofit organization and you provide services in the emergency assistance sectors, such as food, shelter, rental assistance, utility assistance, well, the United Way of Southern Nevada, they have a emergency assistance and community needs fund specifically for nonprofits to write proposals to get selected in this RFP process, so that then they can become eligible to allocate those types of services, complements of United Way of Southern Nevada. So I wanted to focus upon the word within the mission of Opportunity Alliance of Nevada, stabilize. And these are some resources that could help our business community hopefully stabilize, at least to some degree, amongst the pandemic and this current public health crisis.
And building off of stabilize and moving in from stabilization to not only recovery is of course the buzzword right here. Let's talk about long-term recovery. Let's talk about growth. And again, Kathleen, everything that we've incorporated in of how important the technological demand here is going to be. And I'm tying this into a question that we received with COVID. How do we make sure that minority, lower income business communities have access to technology needed to make this shift? And I'm wondering just funding opportunities as well, whether they be CARES Act, federal level funding, or potentially other forms of opportunity funding. Are there opportunities to be able to get access to cash, to funding, to be able to maybe upgrade some of the technological things we've been talking about here? I'll open that up to the entire panel.
Well, the biggest, Kip, one of the biggest things of being an entrepreneur, I teach Next Level. I teach Boots to Business. I teach a lot of workshops. Entrepreneurship is a little bit different, right? From this standpoint, that entrepreneurs have to have a different motor when it comes to research, right? So all the things that Kathleen's talking about, an entrepreneur would typically know those things because they're really going after those things. And the same thing with technology. There are many technology grants that are available to the chambers, available to some of the other organizations, as well as available to some of us. I know that Microsoft is often in our chamber dealing with things, but I want to give a good plug to something that exists right now, the Nevada Help Desk. Nevada Help Desk is an organization started or basically not started, but run by one of our IT roundtable members, Dewana Malone, and pushed by the governor's office, is basically backed by the governor's office, where our students from high school and college are right now, building websites, helping with mobile texting, helping with building podcasts and all those different things. So there are so many resources that are available to folks, but you have to be actively engaged to get that information. You can't, it is one of those things, like if you're not looking for it, it won't find you. So, it's really important that people think about the technology piece, because that's why I gave the reference of the BlackBerry to the iPhone, because technology changes so fast that having a resource like Nevada Help Desk will get you either at par or above par when it comes to being in the game and staying in the game and thriving through this pandemic.
Also, Kip, another resource, the city of Las Vegas, they launched about a year or so ago the International Innovation Center, Las Vegas. And it's a business incubator for tech-focused companies. And they're actually like literally down the street from the SBA's office on 4th Street. It's a fantastic initiative that the city of Las Vegas has undertaken. They are looking at expanding that particular model to accommodate additional technology-focused firms. So Las Vegas, we are building and establishing a tech-forward pool of resources for the community to access. And also UNLV recently launched about a year or so ago, if I'm not mistaken, technology center as well. I think it's affiliated with the SBDC, and I'm really excited about that as well as a potential resource. So we are, like Shaundell said earlier, we are, striving and thriving to be more accommodating and more resources, to identify resources that are available in the tech industry for our community.
Yes, and back to Shaundell's point also, this isn't something that you just get through via osmosis, and you typically are not going to just search for these things. So Ken, I'm going to come back to you, and I'm going to get the name right this time, the Urban Chamber of Commerce. Is that a good recommendation? Opportunity Alliance of Nevada, of course, is one of these resources. Is becoming a chamber member one of those, and what other affiliate organizations should entrepreneurs and small business owners be part of to really have their ear to the ground, so to speak?
I would definitely support participation in a chamber of commerce, but I'm going to go beyond that. I would suggest several chambers to the extent that they are a good fit for your business, whether it's a geographic fit, whether it's a market or a sector fit, or whether it's a size fit. I would say take a look, because there are multiple chambers of commerce out there. In addition to that, I would suggest that you look at the trade associations or the field of industry associations that you're involved in. Pay attention and participate with those. In many cases, you can get on the email list for a business organization or a trade association and kind of give it a trial run based on the e-publications or the events, these days virtual events that they host. But the main thing is you have to make sure you're out there researching, as Shaundell said, and digging for that information. There's a saying we have when we're doing our classes is you need to make sure that you carve out time to work on your business versus spending 100% of your time working in your business. Anybody that knows me, even before I came to the chamber, but I've continued it because we run our chamber like a business. On Saturday and Sunday mornings, I'm online reading and digging for information and then sharing articles and websites and links, and make sure that people understand that you are open and receptive to information like that. And in many cases, they will push information to you. For example, thank you, Kathleen, for outlining several of the resources that you mentioned, because when we established our COVID-19 website, in many cases, people were pushing links to us about opportunities for small business grants from Zappos and Google that we weren't necessarily aware of, but because we put ourselves in the information flow, it'll continue to come to you.
And I just want to make a point also here, in addition to what you're saying, Ken and Kathleen, in terms of policy solutions, of course, building out of the Nevada United Roadmap to Recovery. Keep in mind also that the state, through the Governor's Office of Economic Development, is working on this CARES project for the small business sector and business in general. It is important. There are moving priority areas, but within that, again, this complex equation points to, again, grants and resources to propel businesses. And of course, given that we are a small business majority state, also, there is this component of micro and minority businesses. And my last point, again, based on everything that it was said, tap into the roadmap. There is your ecosystem, and not just the business development ecosystem, but also points to economic development and workforce development.
A question, it really loops it back to the beginning of our discussion, Shaundell, what you were talking about with really the shift generationally, the mindset shift. The question is, are there youth programs or ideas for minority youth that introduce them to the world of entrepreneurship? Is this a good way to create and narrow the gap? We had a respondent say Junior Achievement is one of the great resources we have for workforce and entrepreneurship learning. Take it to the whole panel here. Other opportunities for youth.
Yeah, Junior Achievement is a great organization to help with entrepreneurship. And we just recently launched another organization, a nonprofit called Seeds. So it's a social enterprise. And so one of the things that we're looking to do is teach young people how to utilize entrepreneurship. Even if you're going to be employed by someone, entrepreneurial skills are great, because even though I served 10 years in the Air Force, I still used a lot of the entrepreneurial skills that a mentor taught me when I was 13 years old. So it really builds on that piece altogether. And by the way, it's actually law when it comes to the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act during the Obama administration, that any time that we're doing youth training for workforce, we're supposed to have entrepreneurial component and entrepreneurial training. So that is really how most of the youth, or how all of the youth programs are supposed to work via the WIOA law, that entrepreneurship is supposed to be a part of training as a part of workforce. So there are many other youth organizations, and we can definitely give you a list of those. But, you know, yes, we are looking to do generational. And one more point I'll make about the Urban Chamber, that we went to a model even with our board of directors, where we decided that we're going to have 4 or 5 new board members who may not even have had board experience, but we're training them and gearing them up for the next generation. So we're looking at the next generation of entrepreneurs, and we're calling it, we're bridging that gap. Plus we're calling it passing the torch. So we're passing the torch. And with that, they get the experience. Instead of me leaving the board and then handing them the torch, they're on the board with us, watching the mistakes, watching the lessons, even learning from some of the successes that we might have. And this is the best message that they're getting right now through this COVID-19 situation.
Any other youth resources you want to identify?
Yes, I just want to hop in and say, I saw someone mention Summer Business Institute. In addition to that, I'll mention the fact that internships through local academic institutions like CSN, Nevada State College, or UNLV or up north, they have community colleges and UNR up there. Between Summer Business Institute, which is focused on high school students, and then internships, that is a great way to expose youth and young adults to entrepreneurship before it becomes real. I'll give you an example that is just very real time. We're fortunate enough, we have a Summer Business Institute student with us this summer for about a 30-day plus period. Well, when I was getting an orientation conversation with her completed, the individual indicated that ultimately they have some initial video production skills, but one of the things they've been doing is doing the editing for video blogs for individuals in her family and beyond. I said, well, have you thought about turning that into a business? And the individual said, well, yes, actually I have, plus I have another partner. I was like, well, have you incorporated or done any of the things to get the business up and running officially? And hasn't done quite everything, but in my mind, that's a golden opportunity to show her, quote unquote, the official, accurate way to do a business, plus share the resources we have on the roadmap, and just help her understand before she graduates, before she goes to college, because she does plan to go to college, how she could keep that business going, and then maybe who knows where it'll be 5-10 years from now. But it's definitely going to help in this case with the wealth gap, because we're exposing her as a high school senior to how to be an entrepreneur.
Also,
Go ahead, Kathleen. Great example, Ken. Yes, Kathleen, please.
yes, in addition to what was aforementioned, earlier this year, actually last year, I cultivated a partnership with Help of Southern Nevada, and they have a program specifically for youth or young adults. And in addition to increasing their skills in workforce, for workforce development and becoming an employee, I introduced the proposal to let's look at entrepreneurship as an option as well, to create workforce, to create employment, to create another option for them. So over the course of several months, I connected their staff to the Urban Chamber of Commerce. We had a really great meeting with Ken, and we were talking about just a pilot program to expose them to entrepreneur training, which would hopefully lead into an opportunity to intern with a select group of members at the Urban Chamber of Commerce. So all of that is in the works still. Some adjustments are being made due to COVID-19, but that's another type of program that was not available that someone with a small business background, such as myself, saw the potential and then took the initiative to connect the dots to create a youth entrepreneurship training program at Help of Southern Nevada. So I'm really proud of that as well.
Great resource. We're just about out of time. I wanted to mention another one too. City of Las Vegas, this is in the chat box for those of you that didn't see it. City of Las Vegas Department of Youth Development and Social Innovation. It's a Batteries Included program, along with Nevada Partners, also operates local My Brother's Keeper efforts. Very, very important, related to also juvenile justice and what's happening within our school district, extremely important. I also wanted to just close this out before I give it back to Linda here. It was Ted Watkins that made this comment. I think this is extremely important, a great way to end our conversation. The best program is actually, quote, you. What they see is what they'll be. If they can see you grinding, performing, and achieving milestones, you serve as the initial inspiration into entrepreneurship. What a great statement. Thank you for that, Ted. Thank you, panel. What an amazing conversation. Really appreciate all of your time. Wish we had another hour to discuss this. I think we could probably use it. But we have really, really great discussion. Thank you so much. Linda, I'll give it back to you.
Yeah,
Well done.
And again, I echo all Kip's sentiments. Big thank you to the panel. And I do think this conversation could have continued for quite some time and in a very valuable and productive way. Great discussion on the current issues. You know, what does long-term recovery and growth look like from the impacts of COVID? What resources exist now? What are the needed support systems going forward? All really, really important conversations and very much appreciated. As I'm not sure if I mentioned at the beginning, but these panel discussions are recorded. You will be able to find them on our website and be able to share them. Our next panel discussion will be next Thursday, same time, on the justice system. I think it's going to be as interesting as all of them. And please share that information with your networks as well. If you have any questions for us, feedback, you know, suggested conversations, please contact us. And I just want to thank you all again for your time. Wish you a happy rest of your day, and please stay well.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, Linda.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.